Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you've looked at the latest Alpha 4.9 update, it's easy to think this patch is all about the new Super Heavy Armour, a heavy machine gun, some updated loot, and a few quality of life improvements. And to be fair, those are all exciting additions. But after spending some time going through the Evocati build, I actually think most people are looking at this update the wrong way. Because when you step back and look at everything together, it starts to feel less like a content patch and more like Cloud Imperium rebuilding Star Citizen's FPS gameplay from the ground up. Now, before we jump in, remember this is still an Evocati build. Everything we're talking about today is still being tested. There are bugs, there are balance issues. Some features will almost certainly change before Alpha 4.9 reaches the live servers, but there's already enough here to see the direction CIG is taking. For years, Star Citizen's FPS gameplay has had the same recurring complaints. Combat could feel inconsistent. Sometimes enemies reacted perfectly. Other times, they'd absorb an entire magazine or stand completely still because the server was struggling. Loot often didn't feel worth chasing. You could spend 20 or 30 minutes clearing an outpost only to walk away with items that barely covered the cost of the ammunition you used getting there. Armor choices also became fairly predictable. Most players simply equipped whatever gave the highest protection with very little thought about different combat roles. None of those issues completely ruined the experience, but together they stopped Star Citizen's infantry gameplay from feeling as polished as its ship gameplay. And I think that's exactly what Alpha 4.9 is trying to address. Let's start with the feature that doesn't sound particularly exciting: damage markers. At first glance, they look like nothing more than another user interface update, a few symbols appearing on your screen after every hit. But I honestly think this could end up being one of the most important additions in the entire patch. Think about how combat works today. You fire at someone wearing heavy armor, they don't go down. Immediately you're left asking questions. Did I actually hit them? Did the server register the shots? Did their armor absorb the damage? Or was I simply using the wrong weapon? Until now, the game hasn't done a great job of answering those questions. The new damage marker system changes that. Players receive much clearer feedback about what's happening when rounds connect. Instead of guessing, you'll understand whether your shots are being effective or whether you need to change your approach. That might sound like a small quality of life improvement, but good shooters are built around player feedback. The faster players understand what's happening, the better combat feels. Now let's move on to the new Super Heavy Armour. Most people are looking at this as another cool armour set. I think it's much more than that. I think it's introducing another dedicated combat role. Instead of everyone turning up wearing roughly the same equipment, squads can begin specializing. One player pushes the front, another provides covering fire, someone hangs back as medical support. Others stay mobile to flank around the sides. That naturally creates much more interesting teamwork, and that's exactly where the new heavy machine gun fits in. This weapon isn't just another rifle with a bigger magazine. Its purpose is suppression, holding choke points, covering doorways, keeping enemies pinned while teammates reposition. That's something Star Citizen hasn't really encouraged before. The armor and the weapons support each other. One exists because of the other. Another feature that hasn't received much attention is combat clothing. It sits between civilian clothing and full armor, giving players more flexibility depending on the mission they're taking on. Not every contract needs maximum protection. Sometimes mobility is more important. Sometimes you're operating inside settlements where a full military loadout isn't ideal. Giving players meaningful choices is always a good thing. Loot has also received some very welcome improvements. This is one area where I think Alpha 4.9 could quietly make a huge difference. Instead of finding random items everywhere, loot is becoming more contextual. NPC inventories make more sense. Containers better match their locations. Rewards feel more appropriate for the challenge you've just completed. That might not sound revolutionary, but if players know difficult FPS missions consistently provide worthwhile rewards, they're much more likely to keep playing them. Now let's talk about Siege of Orison. Ironically, I don't actually think Siege is the biggest story here. The event itself has been redesigned with instance gameplay, checkpoints, and a much tighter mission flow. That should make it significantly more reliable than the original open world version, but the really interesting part isn't Siege itself, it's the technology behind it. This is one of CIG's biggest tests of instance gameplay. Instead of relying entirely on the shared persistent universe, players enter a dedicated mission space built specifically for cooperative gameplay. If that works well, it opens the door for far more structured experiences in the future. Now, to be clear, CIG hasn't confirmed future dungeons or raids built on this system. But it's easy to see how this technology could support much larger story-driven missions later on. That's why I'm paying far more attention to the instancing than I am to the event itself. Finally, we have the AI improvements. This is probably the least flashy part of the update, but it could end up being one of the most important. Better pathfinding, improved reactions, more reliable combat behavior. All of these changes support every other improvement we've already talked about, because even the best armor, weapons, and loot systems don't matter if the enemies aren't enjoyable to fight. Of course, Alpha 4.9 still has plenty of work ahead of it. There are bugs. Server performance still needs attention. Mission blockers continue to appear during testing. That's exactly why this build remains in Evocati. But despite those issues, I'm actually very encouraged by the direction CIG is taking. When Alpha 4.9 was first announced, I thought this would simply be another content update. After looking through everything that's changed, I don't think that's the case anymore. I think CIG is quietly rebuilding the foundations of Star Citizen's FPS gameplay. None of these additions are game-changing on their own, but together they make combat clearer, more tactical, more rewarding, and ultimately much more enjoyable. For me, that's the real story of Alpha 4.9. Not one new armor set, not one new weapon, but a collection of improvements that all push Star Citizen's infantry gameplay in the right direction. And honestly, I think that's something worth getting excited about. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed the video, let me know what feature you're most looking forward to in Alpha 4.9. I'll catch you in the verse.